Hi, and welcome to episode 94 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I am Steve Elliott, the editor at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our bud pick of the week. We have here some very good-looking Alien Fire OG. I found this at my local medical marijuana dispensary here in Kingston, Washington. The place is called Integrated Medicine. This stuff goes for $12 a gram, or you can get 4 grams for $40. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the U.S. this week, a Senate committee allowed marijuana legalization to move forward in the nation's capital. A key Senate committee on Thursday passed a bill allowing Washington, D.C. to establish regulated marijuana stores and to let banks provide financial services to state legalized marijuana dispensaries. These are just two of several marijuana reforms advancing in Congress, according to the Drug Policy Alliance. Meanwhile, sentencing reform is gaining steam, and the United States is shifting towards treating drug use as a health issue instead of a criminal justice issue. The stage has been set to end the federal government's failed war on marijuana, said Michael Collins, policy manager at DPA's Office of National Affairs. A bipartisan consensus has emerged in favor of reform, he said. Now, last November, nearly 72% of D.C. voters approved a ballot measure making it legal to possess and grow marijuana for personal use. The campaign to pass Initiative 71 was driven by public demands to end racially biased enforcement of marijuana laws and was seen as the first step at taking marijuana out of the illicit market. A broad base of community support from multiple civil rights organizations, faith leaders, and community advocacy groups supported Initiative 71, viewing it as an opportunity to restore the communities most harmed by the war on drugs. After a political tug-of-war, House Republican leadership was able to push through a controversial spending amendment that prohibited D.C. from legalizing and regulating marijuana sales. But the amendment allowed Initiative 71 to take effect. Thus, it is legal to possess, use, and grow marijuana in the nation's capital, but the sale of marijuana remains illicit and unregulated. D.C. officials, police, and drug policy experts have complained that Congress is undermining public safety by preventing the city from regulating marijuana, with some calling the situation the Dealer Protection Act. The Financial Services Spending Bill adopted by the Senate Appropriations Committee on Thursday deletes the congressional ban. If the bill becomes law, D.C. could finally regulate marijuana, setting time and place restrictions, requiring proper labeling and content control, establishing age restrictions, and taxing marijuana and using the proceeds for treatment, education, and rebuilding communities devastated by the failed war on drugs. Now, while the House funding bill contains language restricting sales, the Obama administration's budget included language that would allow D.C. to move forward with regulated sales. A funding deal is expected to be hashed out by the House, Senate, and the administration later this year. Also in the U.S. this week, the Senate Appropriations Committee approved a marijuana banking measure. On Thursday, they voted 16-14 in a narrow vote intended to ensure marijuana businesses have access to banking services. The amendment was offered by Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat of Oregon, to the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. It would prohibit the Treasury Department and its enforcement arm, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, from using federal funds to punish banks that provide financial services to marijuana businesses that are operating legally under state laws. Many banks are currently unwilling to provide depository and other basic banking services to marijuana businesses because the substance is still illegal under federal law. Federal, state, and local law enforcement and other government officials say marijuana businesses need to have access to banking because operating entirely in cash raises significant public safety concerns. A similar amendment was passed by the full House of Representatives in 2014, but it was ultimately stripped out during the final omnibus budget negotiations conducted by the Senate. The House hasn't yet debated the Financial Services Appropriations Bill in 2015, but a repeat of the Cannabis Banking Amendment is anticipated if and when that debate takes place. It's encouraging to see members of the Senate stepping up and joining the House to address the banking crisis facing our industry, said National Cannabis Industry Association Executive Director Aaron Smith. Access to basic banking services is one of the most critical challenges facing legal cannabis businesses and the state agencies tasked with regulating them. Bipartisan coalitions in both chambers are supporting these reforms, Smith said. It's time to make them the law of the land. The House is unlikely to consider its own financial services bill, according to observers, so it's unclear whether the amendment will be included in any final compromise legislation that is sent to the president. Marijuana businesses in Colorado alone are on pace for nearly $1 billion in revenue this year, according to Dan Riffle, Director of Federal Policies for the Marijuana Policy Project. Forcing these companies to store that much cash anywhere other than inside banks raises significant public safety concerns, according to Riffle. Current federal laws are putting a bullseye on businesses that are operating legally under state laws, as well as their employees and customers, according to Riffle. It's almost as if some federal officials want to see marijuana businesses get robbed, he said. Forcing these businesses to deal exclusively in cash makes it more challenging for states to collect taxes, monitor transactions, and enforce some regulations, according to Riffle. Allowing these businesses to access basic banking services is a critical step towards letting states regulate marijuana as effectively and responsibly as possible. A strong majority of Americans think the federal government should stop interfering in state marijuana laws, according to Riffle. It appears many, if not most, of the top 2016 presidential candidates agree. Also from Congress this week, they've been busy apparently. Congressional briefing highlighted federal barriers to medical marijuana research. A congressional briefing with Representative Earl Blumenauer, hosted by Americans for Safe Access on Thursday, on federal barriers faced by researchers working to understand the medical uses of marijuana, highlighted this important issue. The briefing provided expert insights on how federal policies have undermined medical marijuana research in the state of contemporary medical marijuana research from Dr. Sue Sisley and Dr. David Cassaret. Brookings Institute fellow John Hudak discussed the practical impact of reform proposals. ASA put together this briefing so Congress could hear directly from top researchers how to make increased medical marijuana research a reality, according to Steph Scherer, ASA's executive director. These experts can tell us firsthand how the federal government's policies undermine research and how reforms like the CARES Act can move this essential medical research forward, she said. Dr. Sue Sisley will present insights on how federal barriers have directly blocked her research on using marijuana to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, including the adverse impacts of the Drug Enforcement Administration licensing only one entity, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, to grow the federal research supply of marijuana. The final speaker will be Dr. John Hudak, fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institute and managing editor of the Fixed Gov blog, who discussed the often misunderstood impact of moving marijuana to a different schedule classification under the Controlled Substances Act. There's a growing consensus that more medical marijuana research needs to happen, according to Mike Liszewski, ASA Government Affairs Director. The briefing will provide detailed information about which policies curtail legitimate research and how to create a system that genuinely encourages research, he said. An important ruling from Arizona this week, where an appeals court said the smell of marijuana alone is not enough for cops to bust in your door. Just the smell of pot is no longer enough for them to get a warrant and come in, according to the Arizona Court of Appeals, a decision on Wednesday. The judges in a split decision acknowledged that the odor of cannabis, whether fresh or just smoked, had formerly been enough to provide the cops with probable cause that a crime was taking place, giving the basis to go to a judge to get a warrant for permission to enter and determine the source of that smell. But Judge Peter Eckerstrom, writing the majority opinion, said that all changed in 2010 when Arizona voters approved the Medical Marijuana Act. Medical marijuana use pursuant to AMMA is lawful under Arizona law, according to Judge Eckerstrom. Therefore, its scent alone does not disclose whether a crime has occurred. The smell of marijuana, absent other evidence, doesn't provide the constitutional basis for a search, the judge wrote. Instead, the court set up what is being called an odor plus standard of probable cause. This ruling is considered a huge setback for police and prosecutors who until now have found that claiming they smell marijuana comes in quite handy when they want to search a location, but have flimsy or non-existent evidence upon which to base such a search. Were we to adopt the state's suggestion that scent alone furnishes probable cause of a crime, medical marijuana patients would become second-class citizens, losing their rights to privacy and security, including privacy within their own homes, Judge Eckerstrom reasonably wrote. Pima County Assistant Public Defender David Eutner argued the case and was encouraged by the ruling. But Euchner warned the decision is not an absolute escape clause for those who illegally possess marijuana. Now, according to Euchner, there are some situations where odor alone can provide the basis for a search, such as when someone is seen inhaling something in a public place. What someone says to police can also create sufficient probable cause for a warrant, he said. The ruling is far from a blanket ban on police using the smell of pot to build a case against someone and get a warrant, agreed Pima County Chief Deputy Attorney Amelia Kramer. She said it's clear, however, that smell alone won't be providing the basis for searches in the future unless the appeals court ruling is overturned by the Arizona Supreme Court. The case stemmed from 3 cops claiming there was an overpowering smell of fresh marijuana coming from a warehouse in a 4-unit complex. After getting a warrant based on the odor, the police entered and found 357 cannabis plants and 53 pounds of harvested weed. There was also evidence that the warehouse served as a residence and items indicating a young child had lived there, according to the officers. Occupant Ronald J. Cisco II was subsequently arrested. He tried to have the warrant quashed, but that was rejected by a trial judge, and he was then found guilty. But Judge Eckerstrom said a search warrant requires probable cause, and that means an officer has to show he or she knows facts that would mean the items being sought are connected with criminal activity. The warrant cannot rely on behavior that might as equally be legal as illegal, the judge said. And the 2010 medical marijuana vote changed all of that. The possession of marijuana is not illegal per se, and therefore its scent alone does not disclose whether a crime has occurred, according to the judge. In Arizona, patients with a doctor's authorization may obtain and possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis every 2 weeks. Dispensaries are allowed to grow an unspecified number of plants at off-site facilities, and caregivers can grow up to 60 plants. Judge Eckerstrom acknowledged his ruling may catch the cops off guard since they've operated for years under the premise that marijuana is illegal, period. Law enforcement officers may therefore have understandably developed practices in accord with that now outdated assumption, the judge said. Euchner said a police officer who comes into contact with someone who smells like pot is free to ask questions, including whether the person has a legal right to possess the weed. But the person may choose not to answer them, he said. In Washington State this week, the Purple Haze recreational pot shop was stopped with its 2nd citation for underage sales. Purple Haze is a recreational marijuana store in Everett, Washington, and it's become the only outlet in the state to be caught twice selling cannabis to minors, ironically calling to mind one of the themes of the 2012 I-502 legalization campaign, which was illegal pot dealers don't ask for ID. Bonnie Arnestad, who owned 2 homes next door to the shop, wanted city leaders to keep the shop out, and now she feels totally vindicated. Gee, thanks, Purple Haze, for confirming all the worst stereotypes about marijuana with the added insult of having done that under the 502 banner. Remember, owners of these recreational pot shops were the movers and shakers who convinced the Washington legislature this past spring to pass Senate Bill 5052, which for all practical purposes shut down safe access to medical marijuana dispensaries in Washington state. Now that they've taken out the competition, do they feel comfortable doing the same things they were accusing the medical dispensaries of doing, but which they never proved? I think they should have lost their license after the first one because that was less than 6 months from their opening, Arnestad said. Investigators from the Washington State Liquor Control Board ran a series of decoy operations at 156 marijuana stores throughout the state. Purple Haze is one of 18 stores that sold cannabis to underage customers, and the only one so far to be caught doing it a second time. Can you imagine the outcry from these recreational marijuana merchants if 18 medical marijuana dispensaries were caught selling to minors? That's exactly the kind of accusations that got the medical shop shut down in the first place, without the onerous need to provide any actual proof of wrongdoing. The owner of Purple Haze said he is making changes, starting with new technology. In addition to checking IDs at the door, employees now run the cards through a scanner. This just verifies that it's a valid ID and a real ID, said employee Paul Henry. It shows all the information that I checked visually. The owner said he has also introduced new training and other measures to keep employees on task about checking for underage customers. The law says to keep it away from children, Arnestad said. Well, they aren't doing a very good job about it. Purple Haze faces a mandatory 30-day sentence, a 30-day closure, although it has the right to appeal that. A third offense, though, would cost the owner his retail marijuana license. Also in Washington state, medical marijuana referendum R76 won't be on the ballot. Voters won't get the chance this fall to have their say on whether the Washington legislature should have made changes to the medical marijuana laws. Organizers of a petition drive to place a referendum on November's ballot reported they won't be turning in the signatures by the deadline this week. I regret to report that Referendum 76 effort has fallen short of the number of signatures gathered to qualify for the November ballot. Organizer Don Skacke posted on the R76 No Facebook page on Tuesday. This was made known to the elections office yesterday afternoon and has appeared in the press already. While things are bad for patients, Skacke said, the struggle continues. Please support real legalization through Initiative 739 for home growing, collecting signatures through December 31st. The Secretary of State's office on Monday confirmed that the referendum had fallen short. R76 would have challenged changes in Washington's medical marijuana law, putting medicinal cannabis under the regulation of the Liquor Control Board, currently in charge of recreational marijuana industry. Medical marijuana dispensaries and growers will have to be licensed. The catch-22 is that no licenses are available, and none have been awarded since 2013, and the path to legality for these shops is murky at best. The new law, Senate Bill 5052, also sets up a registry system for patients who will be allowed to grow 6 plants if registered, but only 4 if not, and imposes a tax system on medical cannabis similar to the recreational marijuana system. Patients opposed the new rules at numerous hearings during the 2015 legislative session, saying they won't have access to the strains of cannabis that control or relieve their medical conditions, and that they will be unable to afford the heavily taxed, highly priced medical marijuana available in recreational 502 stores. A quick visit to Cushmart in Everett, followed by a corresponding visit to a medical marijuana dispensary down the street, more than confirmed these concerns. Cannabis-infused edibles at Cushmart ran $60 for 60 grams of THC, divided due to onerous state rules, 60 milligrams of THC, divided due to onerous state rules into 10 ridiculously small 10-milligram portions, while a brownie at the dispensary cost just $10 at the medical marijuana dispensary, as opposed to the recreational store. That brownie, that $10 brownie, had 250 milligrams of THC. That brownie would have cost $250 at the rate of the recreational shop. It was $10. Even wealthy patients could spend themselves into the poorhouse at $1 a milligram for THC. A group of patients advocates calling itself the Medical Cannabis Patients Political Action Committee on Monday announced it would work to improve the present laws for the benefit of patients. A separate activist group, Sensible Washington, said it will try to overturn the new law through court challenges. It is raising money on the internet to help cover legal costs. In Israel this week, an exciting new study showed marijuana helps heal broken bones. In yet another demonstration of the broad usefulness of cannabis for a range of diseases and injuries, Israeli scientists discovered that marijuana can be effectively used in healing broken bones and possibly in treating skeletal illnesses. Researchers from Tel Aviv University published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research a study that showed cannabis includes a component which enhances the healing process of fractured bones. Cannabidiol, a non-psychoactive component of marijuana, sped up the healing process in broken leg bones of trial rats with mid-femoral fractures, the study found. While there's still a lot of work to be done to develop appropriate therapies, it is clear that it is possible to detach a clinical therapy objective from the psychoactivity of cannabis, said Dr. Yankel Gabet of Tel Aviv University's Bone Research Laboratory. CBD, the principal agent in our study, is primarily anti-inflammatory and has no psychoactivity, he said. Scientists tested 2 groups of rats, one with both CBD and THC, and the other with CBD only. We found CBD alone to be sufficiently effective in enhancing fracture healing, Gabet said, in a statement which seems to imply that THC was also effective. Other studies have also shown that CBD to be a safe agent, which leads us to believe we should continue this line of study in clinical trials to assess its usefulness in improving human fracture healing, Gabet said. The researchers found that human cannabinoid receptors, naturally found in multiple locations throughout the human body, stimulate bone growth. More studies to study the use of cannabis to treat osteoporosis and other skeletal diseases are now planned. We only respond to cannabis because we are built with intrinsic compounds and receptors that can also be activated by compounds in the cannabis plant, according to Dr. Gavitt. The clinical potential of cannabinoid-related compounds is simply undeniable at this point. Now, marijuana also helps provide bone tissue with mineralization, according to the study, so it also protects bones from further injury, making them stronger. After being treated with CBD, the healed bone will be harder to break in the future, Dr. Gavitt said. Before we go this week, there is an article on Toke Signals that you really should check out if you care about what's happening economically to medical marijuana patients in Washington State and elsewhere right now. The article is called Medical Marijuana, Corporate Control versus Compassionate Use, and is written by an activist named John Novak. You really should check that out. It's important information, tokesignals.com. Until we see you next week, I hope you stay lifted. See you then.